we sometimes have some technical issues, obviously unexpected, but we would rather avoid speaking for 10 minutes and realizing you are guys not here with us, which sometimes happens. Matt, so it's going to be an interesting talk today, and you've currently actually opened the consulting. So how has been generally your path to entrepreneurship, and how you enjoy it?
It's been great so far. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Thanks everybody for being here too. Excited to nerd out with you guys on RevOps and RevOps challenges and growth. Yeah, the path's been fun, interesting, and kind of an adventure, which we'll talk about. Like RevOps, right? So a lot of
well, guys, we will start like in 1 or 2 minutes maximum. Wait for some more people to come, but we will start sharp. And hope you will enjoy. Feel free to ask questions while we will talk. No problem in interrupting us. We will be happy to jump in and answer the questions right away. There will be also some Q&A session at the end. You guys have, I mean, either you leave it in messages or in Q&A. I hope we will cover and capture all of these. And yeah, it's going to be around half an hour. So we try to keep it sharp, practical, and fun for you. And I suppose we will not wait for much longer. Let's dive into this. So Matt, it's amazing to have you here with us. We love to have experts in revenue operations. It's our bread and butter, and also our audience loves it. So what we are going to talk today is basically, you've been part of a big company growth and seeing how the operations evolve along the journey of going for an early stage to unicorn. So that's really interesting from my perspective to hear your thoughts on that. And what we basically will discuss is what's the revenue operations perspective when you move from an early to a growth and to a scaling stage, and what kind of things changes when it comes to tech stack, KPIs, go-to-market strategies. So I suppose we just can start. And the perspective, yeah, as I mentioned, will be people, processes, technology on different stages. And let me know if you want to add anything on that, Matt. If not, we can just dive straight to the topic.
Let's dive in. Let's do it.
Cool. So we have first stage, and the stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks. And everyone, and you already mentioned this, Shemek, but everybody throw in questions. Happy to take questions at any point, and we can dive in wherever you guys want. There's a lot of areas where I think we can get into rabbit holes, which could be fun. So, all right, let's start out with this kind of initial stage of a startup, right? This is when this might be a lot of times founder-led sales. Initially, you might have a couple sales folks, and this is what I like to call kind of the wild, wild west stage of a startup, right? You're trying to find product market fit. You have probably one basic product. A lot of your systems will be very basic or manual, which is normal. And this time you're not really being very selective in terms of who you're going after in terms of go-to-market, right? You're still learning who your ICP is, who are your main personas, where does your product fit, right? So you're trying to learn a lot about what works on the go-to-market side, right? And hopefully there's some learnings early on that you could start to share and start to turn into repeatable action. But in terms of a tech stack, it's going to be very basic, right? You might have a CRM, maybe a free tool. You might have some marketing, like marketing automation, sales support as well. But most of what you're doing is probably going to be manual, not very repeatable processes, right? And then in terms of, go ahead.
I feel like this is the hardest stage for almost any business, find a product market fit where you actually don't know what you don't know, and you kind of look blindly and you are not effective because, as you mentioned, you have multiple ideal customer profiles. You don't know which one is the most effective. So even building anything from that point, it's just a bad decision because you probably will build it in a wrong direction or build the wrong thing. So you need to experiment. And also Steve Blank and all these lean startup models where you have to do customer discovery, and you more like probably also lean to relationships, quick discussions, discovery calls. So there's no point probably to overcomplicate things at that point.
Exactly. I think even if a lot of times you won't have a RevOps team yet, but even if you do, you want to avoid the temptation here to over-engineer processes, right? Because from a process perspective, you always want to build something that's scalable, but you don't know what that is yet, right? You don't know what you don't know. So you want to stay agile here. You want to be adaptive. You might build in some short-term solutions, and you want to make sure that you're enabling the folks who are doing the frontline work, even if it's founders or just a couple sales folks, to be fast and make sure there's feedback coming really quickly to be able to adapt what you're doing on the go-to-market side and build out that ICP over time, right? So you're not really going to build out more robust processes until you get to product market fit. Yeah.
Exactly. And do you think that it's better to keep it on Excel or don't have it at all? Or you believe that CRM is like mandatory, whatever, even if you are just brainstorming and ideating on your product and service and trying to talk with people if it's the fit or not, you think you should, I mean, you are okay with Excel, or you should look for even free CRM like, I don't know, HubSpot, Close.io, there are many like
yeah.
these.
I lean more towards using the CRM from the beginning and starting to build out that muscle, even if it's basic, even if some of it's manual. Again, you don't want to build in probably too many fields or too much information, right? So you don't want the team spending a lot of time manually inputting data. You want them out there learning, right, and sharing those learnings. But I would start to lay the groundwork, at least have a CRM, some of the basic information so you can start to lay out some basic metrics as well, especially volume metrics, right? And then also, go ahead.
Sometimes people feel like it's probably, I mean, Excel file is enough, or I have an Airtable, or I have Trello. But I believe embedding this habits of having a CRM, even for this customer discovery, where you have, okay, those are my hypotheses of my product. I will interview 100 people, and I can also map it out somehow in my CRM on a pipeline where it's the stage that I interact with them or I didn't. It's better probably than actually just having a CRM or having an Excel or whatever.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's some elements that will be outside of the CRM, maybe like planning or more advanced reporting you might have outside of the CRM. You might have, you want to probably map out your customer journey now and start to map that out and iterate on it. That's obviously not going to live on the CRM. So there's some documentation, other elements that are going to live outside of it. But I think the earlier you could build in some of those basic functions in the CRM, the better, because you're going to avoid issues down the road and technical debt that the team will have to deal with.
Correct. I go next because that's probably not the most interesting stage from the RevOps perspective. So let's see what's about KPIs, operational cadences, and RevOps team here.
Yeah. So from here, like I mentioned, you might be, especially from a lot of you may be familiar with this as a RevOps person. You might start out as a team of one here, and you might come in. And it's going to be very reactive. There's going to be a lot of fires to put out. And that's kind of the way that the entire stage works for go-to-market, right? You're kind of taking whatever comes in. It's not a very targeted, proactive approach. And from a RevOps perspective, you're going to be putting out fires all over the place and having to prioritize based on what's most urgent, almost trying to build some sort of roadmap, right? But a lot of times you're going to be the firefighter, especially early on, making sure that you can measure revenue and high-level metrics reliably. And a lot of the focus as an org will be on that top of funnel. So on generating, the activities that the team is carrying out, making sure there's volume metrics, we're able to track customers that we're adding. And then the team itself will be focused on kind of building a very basic forecasting reporting cadence, but you're not going to get too far into the weeds here.
And I suppose it's like, probably you can also have a summary in a second, but it's basically where you need to bring top of the funnel and you focus on how many meetings do we have with people so we can understand more about our RCPs, how many deals we are opening, are we closing it, and do we have a revenue that we want to achieve? But you don't have time to optimize and to think too deeply into efficiency or some specific quality metrics, right?
Exactly. And really, I think there's two goals here. One is to enable the team as much as possible for them to be able to act quickly. We mentioned that speed and learn fast. And on the other hand, you want to avoid building debt, right? That your team will then have to spend time on down the road when you want to be spending time on bigger rocks, process optimization, and focusing on scaling, right? You don't want to have to go back and fix the entire CRM at that point.
We can just give some quick examples. Here it's, your team probably is much more simplified. Either it's founder stage, so you have founder sales, plus you have some customer success. Maybe you have a SDR team with account executives and then some customer success team. But this is basically simple as that. And for the foundations, I would also add that when it comes to simple CRM, you should at least be able to chart the lifecycle stages at a minimum. So understand how many leads, MQL, SQL opportunity you generate. You have basic conversion rates, but you have volumes at most, and then you also are capable of tracking some revenue goals, total contract value on each month, where in comparison to expected quotas, for example, deals opened by pipeline or lost. But you don't need much more than that, but at least this should be done well. So customer lifecycle stages and revenue plus the deals tracking, which surprisingly oftentimes is not actually done well for even bigger companies.
Yeah, totally agree. And if you can go back to one of the funnels, just really quickly, I think something that's interesting is from a traditional sales perspective, right? A lot of folks measure that, and we even mentioned that early on, the focus is going to be on the left side of the funnel, right? Customer acquisition, and they might build out metrics there. But over the lifetime of your company, 75 to 90% of your revenue is going to be on the right side of that funnel, right? On the customer side. And a lot of times you want to make sure you're not over prioritizing the left side, right? Particularly if RevOps reports into a CRO or to a head of sales, a lot of times they'll spend the majority of their time on the sales team and maybe on the marketing team, whereas CS is what over the long term is going to drive growth in your business and scale. So you want to make sure that you're building out, to your point, KPIs across that entire funnel. And I kind of think of them as 3 layers of KPIs. You have your overall volume metrics, your conversion metrics, and then your time metrics for each of these phases of the customer journey. And make sure that once you start to prioritize projects and build out a roadmap as the company grows, that you're focused on what's going to generate the most revenue, and you're able to stay unbiased, even if you're reporting into a CRO, for example, where the tendency could be to focus more on sales, right? And early on, that's okay. But as you grow, you want to make sure that what you're focusing on is truly best for the business, right? And that's generating happy customers.
And that's, I think, something that wasn't that common in the past. And actually, HubSpot recently just implemented the customer lifecycle stages. So you had this customer and evangelist, but now we can say, I have a customer, I have a recurring customer, or a customer that achieved a lot of impact from my side, and then the customer that reached lifetime value. And when you are at the stage of product market fit and the growth, soon you're going to talk about it to go more deeper into analytics of each segment. If you have the full end-to-end cycle, lifecycle stages measurement, you can now ask, what are these all customers that I've closed that eventually became lifetime value customers, and then I can optimize and have a feedback loop on my top of the funnel. Okay, I should actually look into this ICP, and maybe I should resign from other ICPs because I spend a lot of time, generate a lot of opportunities, but they don't turn into a best customers. Never.
Exactly. And one thing that's interesting from a reporting perspective is a lot of times you'll have these metrics that each team is quote unquote in charge of or responsible for, right? But they might not look at, for example, marketing, you're looking at MQL generation. But what we might not look at if you don't have that full funnel built out is how many of those MQLs are turning into customers and how many are becoming successful customers over the long term, right? So you might be optimizing for generating volume, but it could be poor volume, right? Customers who aren't happy, and you're just creating churn issues down the line. Yeah.
And we know the situation, especially when you have a separated ecosystem, right? You have HubSpot, which is generating MQLs and sending them to Salesforce, and then Salesforce is doing the sales are working on a pipeline and closing the deals. They are not talking too much to each other, and marketing is basically happy that they generate a lot of MQLs. Sales, they're doing their own job, and things live in an islands, right?
Yeah, and everyone ends up pointing the finger at each other, right? That's why RevOps exists, and I'm sure we've all been through that, where you have one team saying, "Oh, but we generated the leads," another team said, "Oh, but we didn't get good enough leads," and CS saying we're selling to the wrong people, and everybody just points fingers at each other. So that's where RevOps can and should be that unbiased partner to actually say we need to improve here and here, right, and prioritize accordingly.
Awesome. So this we had. So let's go into the repeatable stage. So let's assume that we already identified the ideal customer profile. We know the segments we want to go for. So what happens now?
Yeah, so now is when we start to move from being reactive to more proactive and targeted, right, across the go-to-market org and as a RevOps function, right? So tech stack is going to become more advanced, a little more complex. We can start to automate, and we're going to segment across the go-to-market org. So starting from marketing all the way down the funnel, right, and even into CS, we're going to have well-defined segments here, and we might tier accounts to see where we're allocating our resources, right? We want to allocate to the most happy customers, the most impactful customers. So we're going to build in a clear sales process. We're going to have clear handoffs between teams and make sure that that information is flowing between teams. So you're creating really smooth handoffs, and the customer doesn't have to repeat the same information 3 or 4 times, and making sure that there's really effective feedback loops back, to your point, to each of those teams. So we're constantly iterating on lead scoring, the work we're doing at the top of the funnel. We're constantly iterating on the sales process. Are we selling to the right customers? Are we prospecting to the right areas, right? Because if this is where a lot of companies fail, is they start to zone in on their area as they start to specialize, and it's hard to pick your head up and look at the big picture. Are we generating the right type of customers, right? Here it's
and
I think
from the processes perspective, right? I mean, and you would mention soon it into the KPIs. Maybe I could pull off some infographic, but I'm not sure if I can technically pull it off. But basically, from the revenue operations perspective, for some people to be more clear what actually means advance. And so let's say from marketing perspective, you actually start to have really well-defined lead scoring, qualification criteria, a hand of criteria, service level agreement between marketing and sales. You want to track the ROI from specific sources. And so you want to connect the ad spend to revenue. This kind of stuff starts to be more, comes into play. And also from sales, you have sales planning, quotas, forecasting. You might also want to have more advanced lead routing, like with Chili Piper, which is connected with territory planning or maybe a size of accounts. So these kind of processes starts to play in, and you wouldn't have it at the beginning. Obviously, this is something you wouldn't care at all because you would look mostly at the revenue. So I'm just actually moving to KPIs and handing over back to you.
Yeah, totally agree. And this is where hopefully you're starting to become more repeatable and more predictable, right? So to your point, you're building out much more in-depth scorecards here where we're tracking our main metrics against our plan, right? You'll probably have some sort of either top-down or bottoms-up revenue plan, and you want to track against those metrics proactively, right? Probably on a weekly basis. So you're going to start to build out kind of a reporting cadence where all of your KPIs are being reviewed, but especially the top probably 5 to 7. You don't want to go too crazy on what is top level visible to everyone. And you're able to, if you have those KPIs clearly defined and built out, your RevOps team can then dive in. If you say we're behind on this metric, let's dive in 2 or 3 layers deeper and see where that is coming from, right? It's in this particular segment with this particular team or this issue, right? So we want to be very prescriptive here, and the metrics, if we're doing it well, will tell us the story in a lot of cases on where.
And what would you track if we would move actually back to this, right? What kind of 5, 6 key metrics you would consider at this stage that usually you see within companies to be tracking?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be that client acquisition side, to your point. As you start to grow as an org, you're going to bring in more of the CS metrics, probably the lifetime value metrics, net dollar retention, et cetera. But it's really the conversion metrics and overall volume that you're going to be looking at the most across the board. So you should know if you're tracking, and you need to build in the time component, right? You need to know that if you're tracking for next quarter, you need to produce X amount of revenue now or pipeline now for next quarter, depending on what your sales cycle looks like and what, obviously your product. But I think these metrics here are a good example of maybe what 4 or 5. How many ops are we creating? How many SQLs? How many customers are we adding? What's the size of those customers, right? So sales velocity. And then is there anything on the customer side that should raise a flag saying, oh, we're seeing a lot of churn or we're seeing customers that aren't growing over time, right?
Yeah. And to simplify it, probably it's also even from the marketing perspective, the question is how much pipeline do we generate and from which kind of sources do we generate it? Which means how many MQLs we've generated that turned into an opportunity and what kind of value does it what was this opportunity, and then you can see probably also average value for each opportunity. And then on the sales file, the question is, okay, we have certain sales plans that we need to hit the quota. Are we hitting these quotas? Are we generating enough leads? Can we? And then I suppose we can have here. Can we forecast what would be the expected outcome against our goals for the next months? And as you mentioned, the churn rate and these kind of things. So. Yeah, I think we can just summarize with RevOps team and what the stage is about. Yeah,
and just to close up that point, in your point, you're also going to measure pipeline coverage and forecasting. accuracy as well. You're going to start to measure, right? How can we get more accurate over time? And there's two other small points, which is you're going to add in efficiency metrics, right? You're going to start to measure by segment. Does it make sense what we're doing? Are we being efficient and profitable in each of those segments? And then start to do some cohort analyses, because you want to see if those numbers are improving over time by cohort, because as you become more repeatable, you should be able to hopefully have some incremental gains, which can create some more, hopefully exponential growth. And then on the CS side, compounding growth over time. From a team perspective, this is going to turn into, you're probably going to add on some folks, right? You're going to have maybe a deal desk team that you start to build out, a CRM admin, maybe a data analyst or two. Again, it depends on how fast the GTM org grows. Now, of course, I think with the current market conditions, it's a lot harder to add more folks, right, on the RevOps side, because we're not revenue generating directly. So you need to make sure that you have like really clear ROI for this, and you could show what type of work they would be able to do and the value they'd add in order to justify budget. And you might start to build out. This is where you got to be careful. If this growth is happening quickly, you might have different leaders coming in saying, oh, let me bring on this person who used to work for me, or let me bring on an ops person. Since RevOps doesn't have bandwidth, I'm just going to bring on someone to start to do stuff on our end. And that's where you start to see those silos, right? We might have a separate marketing ops function. You might have a separate CS ops function. In an ideal world, you want that to be centralized, right? And you want RevOps to be able to run it, because that way you're keeping an eye on the whole business, right? We talked about your incentives. You want your incentives to stay focused on creating happy customers over time, not on generating more MQLs only, right? You want to generate the right type of MQLs. So
correct. So actually, if I may just ask you, because you've been part of Mural, and I mean, let's just maybe, do you have some kind of a story that you can share that it's, or from, any kind of other work that you did, that is actually a real story, while with kind of an issues or challenges, or actually great opportunities that you pulled off in projects you've implemented on a growth stage that impacted the business heavily from RevOps perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I was at Mural, and we went through, especially during the pandemic, we blew through this growth stage essentially, which was hyper growth, which was an incredible learning experience. And we didn't have time to really do anything well. Almost, we had to really pick and choose and find that balance between finding kind of a short-term solution and trying to build a scalable process. And during that time, one of the things that happened was we had a separate marketing ops org that was built out, because we didn't have time or the resources to really help scale that piece, because we had so much inbound, we couldn't even handle it as a go-to-market org. So really good problem to have, maybe not as common. But a lot of what happened there is we started to build out systems and processes at top of funnel that weren't talking to the other systems. And we ended up in a couple of cases maybe having projects that were almost fixing internal problems and not really generating revenue at the back end, not really focusing on the customer journey. So if you take a step back and say, hold on, is this, for example, redefining qualification criteria? Is this actually helping the customer journey, or is it something that's just solving internal issues, right? Or internal finger pointing, right? So once you have different teams reporting on different metrics, you start to cause a lot of those issues. Even if we had a really strong relationship with that team, it's naturally going to happen because they're working almost on their own. It's really hard if it's not centralized. So there's definitely certain times when I wish we would have had a centralized org, even though things were moving so fast that it was very hard to do.
And we've experienced, to be honest, the same thing, even us internally. So we've been doing a lot of revenue operations projects or implementations, because we felt like it would be awesome to have this great lead scoring system where we can actually layer the intent data on top of our contacts and label them according to what they engaged with. If it's content, if it's event, or it's maybe a specific form, they contacted us right away. So there were a lot of cool projects that felt like this could be useful. But what we've realized and pivoted back again is that, okay, it cannot work from the bottom perspective. It has to work from top perspective, meaning we have a certain goal for this year, and we have a certain campaigns for this year, or certain go-to-markets that we want to pull off. And this is connected with the goals that are sales goals, revenue goals, or some KPIs that we believe improve the customer journey or our organization. And then just thinking, what are the critical points that are necessary to be covered from RevOps perspective? But as you mentioned, because you will always find so many things to improve, but it actually doesn't mean that it will get your organization to the point where you want to be. So I usually see it in every organization. If you don't have a clear goal, projects, which, for example, objective key results is one of the easiest and simplest way to actually lay it down, and then you don't connect everything towards that, things really can spiral into wrong directions, especially when you have a lot of growth and money and you have resources for that. Matt, did I lose you, or let's check it out? Oh, we lost Matt. That was such a good line, and now I don't have a person to comment it. So I think we have back. No, maybe we don't have Matt back. So guys, if you have any questions, this is the perfect moment to actually ask these questions because we wait for Matt and we might reply. What's your process of building roadmap for revenue operations projects based on the presented maturity model?
I'm back.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for taking.
This gave us time to actually ask the question. So the question is, what's your process of building roadmap for RevOps projects based on the presented maturity model? You can start with, because I already gave my monologue, so you can start that, and then I can also give my comments on that.
Thanks for jumping in. Yeah, I think that I want to credit one of my former colleagues, Keith Jones, who's
We're losing Matt. Oh, now you're back.
Oh, sorry about that. I just changed network, so we good. Thanks everybody for hanging with me. This is part of RevOps too, is you have to kind of readjust a lot, right? So when you're building out a roadmap, I think the best RevOps teams build it out like a product org, right? So you're building out quarterly based on the capacity of your team. You're building out a quarterly RevOps roadmap. You're going to have some urgent items that you want to build in, right? Probably 20% of the work is going to be urgent fires you're going to be putting out. And then you want to have big rocks that you're working on throughout the quarter, right? So each team will be working on those. But you want to make sure that you're building that in conjunction with your go-to-market teams. So you're working on those with other initiatives that enablement's working on, that sales and marketing are working on, right? So you want to make sure you're not just building in a silo, that you're actually planning together. So you want to probably build out a quarterly planning kind of operational cadence where you're checking in maybe a month before the end of the quarter and you're starting to build out these models. Then this needs to be visible to the team. So you're able to show the work that the team is doing. And when these requests come in, because it's going to be inevitable, you're going to get a ton of requests from different leaders that are all urgent to them. You're going to show them, hey, we're already working on these 3 items. Do you think this is more urgent, right, than those other items? And a lot of times they might say, actually, you know what? No, it's not, right? Or maybe it is, and then you can rework that roadmap. So you need to be able to build in time for this planning, right? Especially if you're a leader of a RevOps org.
Yeah. I mean, and looking at the maturity, I think, model, at the beginning, when you are at the product market fit stage, you basically just need to set up foundations. So the question is just what is critical for us to operate efficiently, effectively right now? And either it's I need to have a CRM, B, maybe then I need to have a sales engagement platform and be able to do a quick outbound. C, probably it's maybe I need to have a marketing automation platform because I heavily depend on ads and on social media and need to optimize it. Usually it's about go-to-market at the beginning and generating this revenue as soon as possible. When you are at the growth stage, you start to think about efficiency and processes. So you start to document things and repeatability. So this is the question. How now we, for example, if we have a working GTM, let's say outbound, how do we repeatedly now do it across 10 salespeople? How do we train them? How do we onboard them fast? So this is where you probably would prioritize your roadmap. And when you start to have a scaling stage, you think about how to integrate all the systems and you turn more into a tech, probably RevOps, where you integrate systems, you optimize things. You want to have efficiency and you have probably a lot of data quality issues that you want to also mitigate. So it's a lot about risk mitigation at that point.
Yeah. And I think the projects usually get bigger over time. That makes sense, right? They'll probably get longer and more complex over time, and you'll have more stakeholders over time. So as you grow, you're going to have maybe 1 or 2 of those projects per quarter, whereas at the beginning you might have 10 or 15 small things that you're going to be working on, right? Optimizing lead routing, doing some quick reporting updates, doing some quick process updates. And those can happen because the org will be a lot more agile at the beginning than it is later on, right? So I think that project management piece becomes more and more important over time, and being really proactive about the planning, I think, and adjusting that plan and communicating that out becomes more important.
Correct. I mean, it's you can detail down your question, Marco, but depending on what your stage at, but because it's a lot of circumstances can come into the play. But I think that the key thing you should also have in mind while creating a roadmap is, in my opinion, is the question is, are you a reactive RevOps person who waits for requests to come and can fulfill those needs, and basically it's about the method you use to prioritize by impact, effort, or confidence in a certain project, or you are more like a RevOps leader who wants to play a proactive role, saying, guys, tell me your sales plan, tell me your marketing plan. Do you have your marketing plan? Do you have your sales plan? Do you have clear idea what kind of KPIs we need to meet and we need to track to reach those goals? What kind of go-to-markets do you run? Do you need any support in these go-to-markets? Where you believe could be the biggest contribution, and you actually suggest this stuff to the marketing or sales leaders. And then roadmap planning turns into a kind of a different thing, because you more like proactively suggest, and what are the organization goals, and you suggest ideas which is critical to actually meet those goals, because they don't know what they don't know, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and the RevOps, to your point, if you're working effectively as a team, has that high level view, but also knows the numbers and knows the processes better than anyone else. So if you're working effectively, a lot of times you can, to your point, be the one who's suggesting a lot of these higher level initiatives and working hand in hand with the team.
Yeah, probably there's less and less the big organization you mentioned, and there are really good marketing and sales leaders. They know their stuff and they know what they need. So then you are more probably partner consultant than the guy who is telling them what to do.
Exactly.
We are already half an hour in, so we probably will just check out the rest of the content we have, guys. So feel free to ask us last question and Q&A, and then now we just move on to the next slides we have, which would be the team structure. I think we discussed it, but it gets more and more specialized across the path. So the scaling stage, tech stack processes automated. Actually, we covered a lot of this stuff throughout this answer. So I think I would just go next. And I think this is really important to also mention at the scaling stage. Also, the predictability is key there. A lot comes into are we going to hit our goals? If not, what we should do about hitting our goals? And it has to be really precise, because you have to keep your pulse on a daily basis.
Yeah, you need to be proactive and prescriptive, right? If you're reporting, if you're building in the right cadences here, reporting cadences and then monthly business reviews, you'll be able to raise these points before they become an issue, right? Or as they're starting to become an issue, you should be able to see them and raise them and say, hey, this is off. We think it's because of X, Y, Z. We need to dive in now, right? That way you can avoid issues down the road. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's operational cadences. Yeah, this is good. That everyone knows what to report, what to check on the weekly reviews. There are monthly business reviews, quarterly business reviews, quick board reporting, forecasting, planning. I mean, things should be in place at that stage. And if you don't have it in that stage, you basically are blind, and actually you cannot predict. There is no transparency and control over the business. So you need to reduce your debt at that point for sure.
Yeah, and one interesting point about that is I think very few orgs actually map out these pieces, right? The actual operational cadence and what kind of a checklist or a preparation piece for each of those, right? So going into the PR, what should you bring for each of your groups? So a lot of times these meetings can turn into kind of a, hey, I'm here. Maybe you don't have quite an agenda, or you don't have people preparing for them. So maybe you're not getting as much value out of them as you should. And you might not realize the amount of hours that leadership and frontline folks are spending in meetings. So I think if you map it out, you get a much better visualization of that. True. And you can optimize their time more effectively.
And everyone is running like a chickens by the end of the year when there is a new annual plan to be done or quarter to be reviewed, and everyone is looking for some data or basically thinking how to actually approach it. So working backwards, that if I want to have an annual plan, then I need to, let's say, start at least 3 months in advance.
Yeah, and same with board reporting, right? You don't want to have the week of the board meeting, your CEO reaching out and saying, "Hey, I need X, Y, Z," right? No, you should have all that done in your QBR beforehand and have really clear action items from that. Yeah,
exactly, answers to these numbers, because then you come in with numbers, but you don't have answers to these numbers when they ask, right?
Yeah, and a clear plan of action, right? This is an issue. We didn't hit this number, but we're doing X, Y, and Z to address it, right? You already have real good preparation heading into those meetings. Yeah.
Cool. This is something that I think a lot of people are interested in. So a quick overview of the tech stack evolution across these stages. Just give us 1 minute.
Don't focus too much on the actual kind of different sticky notes here, the items, right? As we mentioned, it's going to get a lot more complex. You're going to try to automate as much as possible, and you want to make sure this is for the whole customer journey, which includes financial tools, contracting tools, legal tools, which eventually you want all to tie together. And as we mentioned, you want it to be more proactive. So a lot of the alerts and scoring models will then tie back into the CRM, right? So that your team can take action on those, and that data is all living in one place in your source of truth. So we still have the CRM in the middle, but you're going to have a lot of tools talking to the CRM, plugged in to the CRM over time. And you want to make sure that that becomes proactive. Go ahead. I see you wanted to say something.
I was looking like I was tempted. I just wanted to point out that, there's so much temptation to add some of the tech stack tools at the growth stage. Let's say it would be cool to have call recording, business intelligence, or invoicing system already connected and talking to our tools. Maybe it would be good to integrate and deploy this business intelligence tool where we can have more robust dashboards that we will pull off at our screens at the office. It's all nice, but you have to always pick your battles, and it might not be critical, and it could slow down your growth because you got into a complex projects that aren't yet enough big bottlenecks for you to keep growing. So you shouldn't touch them. You should rather focus on the growth. Let's say, for example, lead routing to increase the results.
Yeah, I think when you're implementing a tool, you need to focus on, okay, is this actually solving a problem, right? And in a lot of cases, you're purchasing a tool because some leader used it in the past and they're used to it and they liked it. So they say, hey, let's implement this. It was great. But are you actually solving an underlying problem, or are you maybe solving a symptom that could be that you're not solving an underlying problem and you're creating more issues down the road, right? Because every tool will bring solutions, but will also bring problems with it and maintenance and cost, right? So in many organizations, they'll end up having 30, 40 tools, and a lot of those are just completely unnecessary when really they should have focused on the underlying processes right behind those. Maybe it was a process problem and not a tool problem, right?
And it comes probably to every aspect. Like it's same as when you learn and when you grow as a company, you have certain unknowns, and you should only focus on these critical unknowns that stop you from growing. Because you know, when you go to a conference or when you are part of a communities, they talk about so many subjects and topics, but some of them it's good to have the inspiration from these topics, and maybe it's something you should implement, but majority of these actually should not be your focus, and you shouldn't even learn about it because it will just take your time from learning some things that are critical now for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, a lot of these I see this now with so many clients where they'll implement you mentioned a call recording technology before they're ready, right? It doesn't really give them any value because they're not using it. So the only value it provides is syncing the activity to Salesforce or to HubSpot or whatever CRM they're using, right? Whereas their time would be much better spent on ICP iteration or lead scoring, whatever that is, to your point, that's actually creating happier customers, right? So I always like to bring that back. Like, will this implementation actually create a better customer experience and more impact for our customers? If the answer is no, you probably shouldn't be doing it, right? Or if it's not clear where that's going to happen, you're wasting money and time, right?
I think it comes to this topic as well. So if you can't take action on it, don't measure it or don't implement it. If you don't have resources and a team to maintain and develop and take advantage of this.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so many things that could be solved internally or built internally that we end up buying for just because it seems easier. But that implementation will take time. You need to enable on it, right? So there's a big cost to this. So
Correct.
and same with KPIs, right? You don't want to over-engineer anything. You want to make sure it's scalable and actually creates a positive impact. Yeah.
Checking what else we have here. So avoid bias as much possible. Yeah, you mentioned
Yeah.
about the CRO. So
Yeah.
if you want to add some comments on that, feel free. If not,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
go
I
ahead.
think in an ideal world, as an ops person, that I love when RevOps reports into someone else, so a COO or a CFO or whoever that is, or maybe even the CEO, because they're able to stay more biased. And I think in most orgs, they probably still report into the CRO today or to a head of sales or whatever that is. In that case, you want to make sure, we mentioned this already, but when you're mapping out your roadmap, you want to try to stay as unbiased as possible and focus again is what we're doing, optimizing for the biggest impact for our customers, right? Ultimately. So naturally, early on, you're going to spend more time on sales probably. And you want to make sure that as you grow, you're focusing on the entire customer journey and your team is not spending 90% of its time on sales, right? Because that also is going to create, it's going to create kind of incentives that might not be the best for the business, right?
Got it. Cool. So yeah, clear expectations, implementations take time. I will just go through it so we can maybe still answer
Yeah.
some questions. The backlog need to prioritize. I think this is something that continuously more work than can be done. And this is interesting. Add a request system to protect the team or RevOps team. So avoid this temptation to work on one-to-one and friends doing some favors
Yep.
for other friends quickly because yeah, things really can get dicey. And actually, last question that I had for you, Matt, is if you would now, having in mind all of this discussion that we had, explain the mural path on, from this early growth to scaling stage. I mean, do you see the same actually pattern and the same process? Tell me.
Yes. So that path, just to give everyone a little context, was from essentially from zero to well into 100 million, right? Path to unicorn. Over that time, we went from I started out as a team of one, and we went from one to about 25 internal RevOps folks, right? And the go-to-market went up to maybe 300 or 400. I'm not sure of the exact number, but it was a lot of people and a lot of growth. I think it was more accelerated than most companies would go through, right? So we didn't have as much time to implement a lot of things, and the team grew way faster. So I think today, especially in today's market, right, that's not very common. And I think there's a lot more focus based on the current market conditions on efficiency and profitability, which I think is a very positive thing, right? Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, teams were more focused on just that growth number, which created some unhealthy incentives that we've talked about a little bit around just adding more customers, just add more customers, whatever that takes. That's all we're going to focus on, right? Whereas that creates issues down the line and down the funnel where you're going to see churn, you're going to see unhealthy customers, and you're going to waste time managing accounts that aren't going to grow or people who aren't really getting value out of your product, right? So I think now, if it were now, we would have gone through a very different path where there was more focus on the overall health of the entire business, more focus on the entire customer journey, and building in those kind of like efficiency metrics, iterations earlier on that will create really sustainable customer growth on the CS side, right? We probably would have spent more time on CS than we ended up spending, which was how can we handle all this inbound that we're having, right? All this demand because of the pandemic and the type of tool that it was. That kind of led us in that direction. So I think now, for clients at least, I think we're seeing that shift happen, right? But you're always going to have that external pressure, right? Of we need to have more customers.
I get it. So your main issues were around how to handle the growth, how to process it well, how to be more efficient in getting more of these customers, and basically throughout the whole, this was the main goal. So, and if you would name a few issues, so one of the issues was inbound, too many inbound leads, how to route them, how to prioritize them, how to contact to the right people. I mean, no shows probably, this kind of stuff.
I think it is interesting because because of the rhythm there, there was so much inbound that we didn't really build out an outbound motion until later. You mentioned that most organizations are going to have to build that on early on, And that's probably where most of the time is going to be spent in that initial kind of wild, wild west experimental stage is outbound, right? You're going to learn a lot in that process. Our process was almost backwards because there was so much inbound so quickly that we needed to optimize for response time and making sure that those folks were getting the responses they need. And we did end up what I start to see now with more and more companies, which is kind of a mix of a PLG motion and then a go-to-market motion, which again, as we mentioned, kind of in that growth stage, you want to be measuring those very differently, and you're going to have processes that are very different for those two motions. So you want to make sure that you're optimizing for the right, when you're building, that you're focusing on that customer journey for each of those motions. And it's very clear and aligned across the entire org, because it's very easy for each org to then operate in silos and not really create clear feedback loops and processes across the entire customer journey, right? So we definitely ran into that as well.
That's interesting. And for folks who how we understand the PLG, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from our perspective, it's basically PLG is that you have a product, you have a freemium account, you maybe have some demo, kind of an automated demo. And the question is when you should reach out to such a person and when they're ready to go to a paid account. So you basically manage your freemium accounts somehow, and it's a completely different journey than someone actually requests maybe a demo event and wants to talk to you one-to-one and then decides what they do next with the tool. And the journey of the customer is different. You need to handle it differently. The processes and automations behind are different. And you want to separate that segments in conversion rates. And because if you put everything into the one bucket, you basically lose track of what's really happening. I mean, as you mentioned, that you go into averages, which are not telling the full truth.
Right. Yeah. You might look at the overall sales cycle or overall, whatever those metrics are that we talked about, right? Overall number of customers, when in reality, you want to be looking at within those segments, what's happening, right? And what are those small points? Because one small improvement in, for example, an intro demo call, to your point, could create, a 0.1% increase could generate $5 million of revenue, right? Increases. So you want to focus on very incrementally each of those touch points. How can we improve them? And that will create exponential growth rather than the assumption of, okay, we just need 2 times the amount of leads to create 2x revenue, right? Which is, even though it like rationally, that's not the best way to think. That's kind of the way that things end up happening when you start planning. A lot of folks just say, okay, we need 2x revenue, we need 2x MQLs. Whereas if you just focus on one element of that process and just optimize that slightly, that would create more exponential growth than just hiring more folks, right?
But usually you need to put math into play to realize that and show the numbers. It's same like this this anecdote. I mean, I don't know exactly, but if you want to, put a card into I don't know how to even say it in English. I don't understand the word. But you want to take a card and put it half, right? And if you put it half, 50 times or something like 40 times, it can actually turn into a skyscraper or something like that. So people don't realize these kind of things. And this comes the same with incremental growth, right? Sometimes it's hard to imagine that 0.5% here, 0.5% there can bring the millions at the end of the funnel.
Absolutely. Yeah. We talk even that front end of the funnel, that left side of the traditional funnel, any sort of incremental changes will create exponential growth. And then on the back end, even more importantly, you have compounding growth, right? Yeah. So even if you can save one customer, that one customer will come back 3, 4, 5, hopefully years. And in order for a SaaS company to be profitable in many cases, you need that customer to be a customer for at least 3 or 4 years, right? So that's really important.
Cool. Hey guys, we are a bit over time. Thank you very much, Matt. Unless someone doesn't give a question right away now into the chat, we are going to finish. And I'm really glad that you guys all stood till the end. So thank you very much for being with us, and cheers. See you soon, probably again, Matt, somewhere else.